In tonight's episode, we uncover 3 terrifying tales buried deep in Asia's modern cities, stories whispered in dorm rooms, shared in hushed voices, and never quite forgotten. One of them takes us to northern Seoul, where an old university building hides a mystery behind cold steel doors. It's the kind of place where fluorescent lights buzz a little too loudly and where elevators don't always go where they should. Everyone knows buildings in Korea skip the 4th floor. The number sounds too much like death. But what if the elevator didn't skip it? What if it stopped on its own? One night, during finals week, a girl named Minji got into that elevator alone. She never made it to her destination. Because that night, the elevator decided it would stop on the 4th floor. Minji was a second-year chemistry student at a university in northern Seoul. Smart, quiet, always exhausted. Like most students during finals week, she lived on instant noodles, vending machine coffee, and 4 hours of sleep if she was lucky. The engineering building became her second home, especially the basement labs, where the air always smelled faintly of metal and mold. The building itself was old. Brutalist concrete, narrow windows, flickering hallway lights. Students joked that it looked more like a bunker than a place of learning. But no one ever laughed about the elevator. It was ancient, slow, the kind that groaned when it moved and rattled, like something inside it was loose. Most people took the stairs. Minji didn't that night. Her legs were shaking from too much caffeine and too little food, and she still had to drop off her experiment log on the 7th floor. The elevator panel was strange. It had buttons for every floor except the 4th. Just 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, 7. Normal in Korea. Superstition. Avoid the number that sounds like death. Minji pressed 7 and leaned against the wall. Eyelids heavy. The doors closed. The light blinked. 1, 2, 3. Then a pause. A soft ding. But no 5. Just a glowing red number. 4. That couldn't be right. The elevator shouldn't even have a 4th floor. Minji stepped forward, confused. The doors began to open with a mechanical sigh, and what she saw next would follow her long after she left that building. At first, it didn't look like a real floor. The doors opened to darkness. No lights, no signage. Just raw concrete walls and an unfinished hallway stretching into nothing. It felt wrong immediately. Too cold, too quiet, like the place itself had been sealed off from time. Minji didn't move. She just stood there, staring into the space, trying to make sense of it. The building only had 6 floors. She had been there for almost 2 years. She knew this. And yet, the number on the panel glowed red. 4. She reached for the button marked 5, but it didn't respond. None of them did. The panel was frozen. Just that single glowing number. Then she saw her. At the far end of the hallway, a figure. A woman, maybe in her 40s, wearing a white lab coat. Her back was turned. She was standing perfectly still, arms at her sides, facing the wall. Minji's first thought was that it was a professor. Maybe someone doing late-night research just like her. Maybe she was in some forgotten utility wing. Maybe this was explainable. But something felt off. The woman didn't move, didn't react to the elevator chime, didn't turn around. Minji cleared her throat softly. "Excuse me?" she called out. No response. The silence was suffocating. The only sound was the faint hum of the fluorescent lights above her. But they weren't flickering like usual. They were steady. Almost too steady. Like the lights weren't powered by electricity, but something else entirely. She looked back at the elevator panel again. Still stuck. Still glowing red. She turned back to the hallway, and the woman had moved. Closer. Now. Still not facing her. Minji's heart skipped. She hadn't heard footsteps. No sound at all. Just one moment far away, and the next, halfway across the floor. That's when she realized something chilling. The woman's lab coat wasn't white. It was stained gray, as if soaked through with something dark. Something that had dried. A long time ago. Minji backed into the elevator, her breath caught in her throat. Her hand hovered over the panel, slapping random buttons. 5, 6, 7, close, close, close. But nothing happened. The doors stayed open, and the woman kept standing there, still, silent, closer than before. Minji could feel her heartbeat in her ears. She forced herself to look away from the figure, to stare at anything else. That's when she noticed something odd on the inside of the elevator door. Etched into the metal, almost invisible under the grime, were numbers, formulas, scribbled like desperate carvings. Acid-base reactions, symbols, equations she half recognized from class, except they didn't make sense. The reactions didn't balance. Some weren't even possible. And right beneath them, a line carved deeper than the rest. Don't talk to her. Minji's hand froze. She looked up again, and the woman was now at the threshold of the elevator. No footsteps, no sound, just there. Still not facing her. Minji tried to speak, but her throat was dry. Every instinct screamed to hit the woman, to scream, to run, but she was trapped. Her back pressed against cold steel, the elevator doors still open, refusing to close. She couldn't even bring herself to breathe too loud. Then the woman moved. Slowly, turning. Her neck twisted unnaturally far, her shoulders following with a sickening jerk, and when her face came into view, Minji almost collapsed. No eyes, just hollow sockets, dark and glistening, and her mouth moving. No sound came out, but her lips were forming words, silent whispers, like she was reciting something over and over and over. Minji couldn't look away. She felt something cold coil around her spine, like the words were being whispered directly into her skull. Her knees buckled, her vision blurred. Then, behind her, a sharp voice called out, "Minji!" She turned. No one was there. The voice was gone. But the woman was smiling now. Minji slammed her fists against the elevator panel, nails scraping across the plastic as she hit every button again and again. Nothing responded. The doors stayed open, frozen in place, as if the elevator itself refused to help her. The woman stepped in, not walked, just appeared inside. The moment Minji blinked, she was there, inches away. The scent hit first. Not rot, not blood, something worse, formaldehyde. The chemical stench of preserved corpses. Minji shrank into the corner, too frozen to scream. The woman's mouth moved again. Faster now. Her lips trembled, whispering some kind of formula. A stream of symbols and numbers. But they weren't random. Minji recognized fragments, chemistry terms, thermodynamics. Calculations she had memorized for finals. But the more the woman whispered, the more her head throbbed. Because they weren't just equations, they were answers. Her answers. Exact answers to the test she'd taken that morning. The same order, the same mistakes. Minji began shaking uncontrollably. How could this thing know? How could it see inside her mind? Then the lights flickered, finally, and for a split second, the woman's face changed. Not human. Blackened skin, gaping sockets, something stitched down the sides of her jaw like wire. Her lab coat had numbers burned into it. 4 students' names, one of them Minji's. She screamed. And suddenly, the woman lunged, her hand reaching for Minji's face, fingers long and sharp like fractured bone. Minji ducked, crawling to the floor, slamming her fists against the panel again. The number 7 lit up. Finally, the elevator doors slammed shut with a shuddering thud. Silence. For a moment, nothing. Then a groan. The elevator creaked upward, slow and heavy, like it was dragging something behind. Minji curled up in the corner, shaking, her eyes wide open. And just before the elevator reached the 7th floor, she heard it. A whisper. Not in her ear. In her head. Repeating the formula. When the elevator finally slid open on the 7th floor, Minji was trembling so badly she could barely stand. The harsh fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting long shadows across the cracked concrete walls. She stumbled out, breath shallow, heart pounding like a drum in her chest. She didn't say a word as she walked down the hall, avoiding the eyes of the few late-night students still milling about. Word traveled fast in the building, and by morning, rumors spread about the strange elevator ride she'd taken. A professor who had overheard the whispers finally pulled Minji aside. His face was grave as he explained something she hadn't known, a secret the university had tried to bury. Years ago, a lab accident on the 4th floor had claimed the life of a young female researcher. Officially, her death was called an accident, something tragic but ordinary. But stories from staff hinted at something darker. The 4th floor had been sealed off after the incident, left unfinished and unlisted on all official maps. No one was supposed to enter it. The elevator was even reprogrammed to skip that level entirely. But during finals week, when the building was full of stressed, sleep-deprived students, the floor seemed to flicker back into existence, if only for a few moments. The professor's voice dropped to a whisper as he added that some believed the woman's spirit lingered trapped in the building, still trying to finish what she started. Some said she recited chemical formulas in the dark, searching for answers that could set her free. Minji listened, chills crawling up her spine. The lab coat, the formulas whispered in her mind. It all made a terrible kind of sense. The university decided to close the building earlier after that week. The elevator still worked all night, but most students avoided it. And sometimes, just sometimes, it stopped on a floor that wasn't supposed to exist. Minji never returned to the engineering building. She dropped out of school shortly after, her mind haunted by sleepless nights filled with whispered formulas and hollow eyes. Some say she still hears the woman's voice in her dreams, reciting equations that make no sense, like a puzzle she can't solve. The building now closes early, but the elevator runs all night unmonitored and unchecked. And sometimes, late at night, when no one else is around, the elevator stops on the 4th floor. But no one is there. Only silence and a faint whisper of a name. Tonight, we're diving into 3 chilling stories from across Asia. Tales where the line between reality and the supernatural blurs in unexpected ways. From an elevator in Seoul that sometimes stops on a floor that shouldn't exist, to a university classroom in Jakarta that stays icy cold no matter the heat. Each story reveals a place haunted by restless spirits tied to tragic pasts. Next, we meet Arif, a student who dared to enter a locked classroom in Jakarta, only to discover something far darker than asbestos warnings or campus rumors. These aren't just ghost stories, they're warnings. And they all leave one question unanswered. What happens when the past refuses to stay buried? Let's step inside. Arif was a first-year student at a university deep in the heart of Jakarta. Bright-eyed but restless, he was eager to make his mark. Orientation week was full of dares, jokes, and stories passed down through the years, some true, some exaggerated. But one story caught his attention more than the others. Classroom B304. The room had been locked for over a decade. Officially, it was closed because of asbestos contamination, but whispers around campus suggested something far darker. Students talked about strange cold drafts that seeped out from under the door, even during the hottest days of the year. Some claimed they heard muffled sobs late at night. Arif was skeptical, but intrigued. When a group dared him to sneak inside, he couldn't resist. The hallway leading to B304 was quiet, the air thick with humidity. The heavy door loomed ahead, its paint peeling and wood warped from years of neglect. He pushed it open just enough to slip inside, the temperature dropping instantly. The classroom was frozen cold, desks covered in dust, and a faint smell of salt hung in the air. Arif pulled out his phone, snapping pictures and grinning as he joked with friends waiting outside. He thought it was just an old, forgotten room, nothing more. But as he looked back at the photos, a creeping unease began to grow. Something, or someone, was there with him, watching, waiting, and that was only the beginning. Arif's laughter echoed softly in the abandoned classroom as he snapped selfies, trying to lighten the heavy silence. The cold wrapped around him like a wet blanket, but he shrugged it off. Old buildings always felt eerie, right? His friends waited nervously outside the door, daring him to stay just a little longer. He moved through the room, posing beside cracked desks and peeling paint, capturing every creaky corner with his phone. But as he reviewed the photos later that night, a chill ran down his spine. In every single frame, there was a figure lurking behind him. A pale girl, her hair soaked and clinging to her face like seaweed. No eyes, just thin, empty slits where her eyes should have been. In one photo, she was right behind Arif, grinning in a way that didn't seem possible. His heart hammered as he swiped through the pictures again and again, trying to convince himself it was a trick of the light, a glitch in the camera. But the strangest part wasn't the photos, it was what came after. That night, Arif woke up drenched, not in sweat, but in cold water. His sheets clung to him, salty and heavy, smelling faintly of the ocean. His lungs felt tight, as if he'd been drowning in his sleep. Days passed, but the symptoms didn't fade. His throat burned, his breathing was shallow, and his room carried a strange scent of seaweed that no amount of cleaning could erase. He mentioned it to friends, but they laughed it off as stress or allergies. Only the old campus janitor listened quietly, warning him to stay away from the classroom. B304 has been closed since the accident, the janitor whispered one evening, voice trembling. A water tank collapsed decades ago. A girl drowned inside. They say her spirit still haunts that room, waiting. Arif wanted to believe it was nonsense, but every time he passed the classroom door, the cold seemed to reach out, pulling at him like an unseen tide. Arif's nights grew darker and colder. One evening, as he sat studying in his dorm, a sudden chill swept through the room, extinguishing his desk lamp. In the suffocating darkness, he heard a faint whisper, a voice so soft it could have been the wind, yet unmistakably human. He froze, heart pounding, and then his phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. Come back. He tried to shake it off, telling himself it was a prank. But the message was followed by a series of strange events, his water bottle inexplicably shattered in his hands. His books were found soaked with salt water, despite never leaving his desk. One day, desperate for answers, Arif approached his professor, hoping to find a rational explanation. The professor's face darkened when Arif mentioned B304. He warned him sternly. That room is off limits, not just because of asbestos. There are things here you don't want to disturb. Confused and frustrated, Arif pressed for details. The professor hesitated, but then shared a local legend. Decades ago, the water tank above B304 collapsed during a storm, drowning a girl who had been studying late. Since then, cold drafts and strange occurrences plagued the room. Arif's friends grew worried, urging him to stop. But one night, when the campus was empty, he found the door to B304 slightly ajar. The cold seeped out, and he heard the unmistakable sound of dripping water. He stepped inside. The air was heavy with salt and decay. At the far end of the room, a shadow flickered. A girl, pale and drenched, with hollow eyes that seemed to pierce right through him. Arif's breath caught as she smiled, a slow, eerie grin that chilled him to the bone. He wanted to run, but his feet felt rooted. The whispers grew louder, surrounding him. And somewhere deep inside, he knew the room wasn't just cold. It was alive, waiting, watching. But for what? And who was the girl really waiting for? Arif's heart thundered in his chest as the shadowy figure stepped closer, water dripping from her tangled hair onto the cracked floor. The chill in the room deepened, wrapping around him like icy chains. Suddenly, the lights flickered violently, plunging the room into darkness for a heartbeat, then flared back on, revealing the girl now only inches away. Her eyes, or the empty slits where they should have been, seemed to glow faintly like pale lanterns in the gloom. Arif tried to speak, but no words came. The silence was broken by a low guttural whisper that didn't come from the girl, but from everywhere at once, walls, ceiling, floor, like the building itself was alive and mourning. Then, the air thickened with a salty mist, curling around Arif's face and filling his lungs with the scent of brine and decay. He gasped, coughing, struggling to breathe as visions flashed behind his eyelids. A raging storm, a collapsing water tank, a desperate scream swallowed by rising floodwaters. When he opened his eyes, the classroom seemed different, warped and shifting, as if layered over itself in time. The girl's face morphed, her expression flickering between sorrow and anger. Arif realized this wasn't just a ghost story. It was a trapped moment in history, playing out again and again inside those four walls. Suddenly, the whispering stopped. The girl reached out her hand, not with menace, but pleading. Then a voice, clear, human, cut through the haze. Arif, leave this place. He spun around, searching for the source. A janitor stood in the doorway, holding an old, rusted key. This room isn't just cold because of asbestos, the janitor said quietly. It's cold because it's full of sorrow. You can't fix what happened here. You can only leave it behind. The air shifted again, and Arif knew the choice was his. Stay and risk being pulled under, or escape and carry the weight of what he'd seen forever. Arif stood frozen, the janitor's words echoing in his mind. The rusty key hung heavy in the man's hand, a symbol of a door that was never meant to be opened again. The janitor's voice softened as he explained more. The official story about the water tank collapse was only half the truth. The real tragedy was deeper, buried beneath years of silence and fear. The girl who drowned in B304 wasn't just a victim of a broken tank. She had been a top student, driven and ambitious, much like Arif himself. But on that fateful night, rumors said she had discovered something dangerous in her research, something someone wanted to keep hidden. When the tank collapsed, it wasn't just water that took her life. It was the weight of secrets, betrayal, and a silence enforced by those in power. Since then, the room had become a prison, a place where her spirit lingered, trapped by unfinished business and sorrow too heavy to release. Arif glanced back at the locked door, understanding now why the cold clung so fiercely to the room. It wasn't just asbestos or decay. It was the grief of a life cut short, replaying over and over, reaching out to anyone who dared to listen. The janitor warned that sometimes the spirit would reach beyond the room, manifesting in strange ways. Wet bed sheets, salty smells, a choking sensation, as if trying to drag someone back into that watery grave. Arif realized the photos weren't glitches or tricks of light. The girl was there, watching, waiting, hoping someone might finally uncover the truth she never could. But even with this knowledge, the questions remained. Who was responsible for silencing her? And could Arif escape the pull of a past that refused to let go? The janitor turned away, leaving Arif alone with the weight of a story still unfolding. Arif left the campus that night with a heavy heart, the janitor's words lingering like a shadow. He never returned to B304, but the cold didn't leave him. His nights were restless, haunted by saltwater dreams and the girl's hollow eyes. Sometimes, when the Jakarta heat was unbearable, a sudden chill would sweep through his room as if the classroom's icy grip had followed him home. Friends urged him to forget the whole thing, but Arif knew better. The locked door still stood at the end of the hallway, sealed, yet somehow waiting. And every now and then, someone new would find it mysteriously open. Who or what was inviting them in? And what secrets still lie buried beneath that cold, cursed classroom? Arif never found the answers. But one thing was certain. Some stories refused to stay silent. Tonight, we journey to Kyoto, a city of ancient temples and quiet mysteries. Here, a university hides a secret far stranger than any legend, a room where students don't just get lost, they forget themselves entirely. From an elevator in Seoul that stops on a floor that shouldn't exist, to a cold classroom in Jakarta haunted by a drowned girl, these stories share one chilling truth. Places marked by tragedy hold power beyond understanding. Next, we enter room 3N, where memory slips away and identities vanish without a trace. What happens when the past erases who you are? And why do those whispers grow louder during exam season? Let's find out. Aiko was a graduate student at a university nestled in the heart of Kyoto, a city where ancient traditions meet modern life. Studying philosophy, she was used to late nights in quiet, dimly lit halls filled with the scent of old books and polished wood. The philosophy wing was one of the oldest parts of the campus, its walls heavy with history and whispered secrets. Among the many rooms, one stood out. Room 3N. Students avoided it after dark, wary of its eerie reputation. They said if you entered alone, the door would click shut behind you, locking you inside a silence so thick it pressed against your ears. The lights would hum softly, and time would begin to slip away. Small things, your schedule, your belongings, would vanish from your mind. Aiko wasn't superstitious, but as exams approached, curiosity and exhaustion pulled her toward room 3N. She needed a quiet place to think, and the rumors only made it more tempting. She pushed open the heavy door, the click echoing through the empty hallway. Inside, the air was cool and still, untouched by time. The faint hum of the lights filled the silence as she settled into the room, unaware that the night ahead would blur the lines between memory and oblivion. What starts as a quiet study session slowly becomes something far more unsettling, where forgetting isn't just possible, it's inevitable. As Aiko settled into room 3N, the silence felt heavier than usual. The soft hum of the fluorescent lights seemed to throb, almost pulsing in time with her heartbeat. She pulled out her notes and textbooks, determined to push through the stress of exam season. Minutes passed, then an hour. She glanced at her watch, but the hands seemed to blur, melting together like wax. Confused, she shook her head, focusing on the page in front of her. That's when it started. Small things. First subtle, then impossible to ignore. She reached for her schedule, but the words on the page dissolved into smudges. Her backpack, sitting by the door, suddenly felt oddly distant, as if it wasn't really there. She stood up, confused, and tried to recall what she had planned after her study session. Nothing came. Her mind felt foggy, blank. She tried to focus, but her thoughts slipped away, like grains of sand falling through her fingers. The hum of the lights grew louder, more insistent. The door clicked softly behind her. Aiko turned quickly. No one was there, but the sound echoed, a clear reminder she was alone. Yet, the silence pressed in, thick and suffocating. She reached for her phone, but the screen remained black. The battery? Dead. Impossible. She had charged it fully that morning. Panic stirred, but she fought to stay calm. Then came the whispers, soft at first, like a breeze through the trees, then growing clearer, sharper. Voices speaking in an ancient language she didn't understand. Her vision blurred, and the room seemed to tilt, the walls bending in and out like ripples on water. Questions flooded her mind. What was happening? Why was she forgetting? Outside, down the dimly lit hallway, students hurried past, unaware. But inside room 3N, time and memory were slipping away, slowly erasing everything Aiko thought she knew about herself. As the whispers grew louder, Aiko's panic deepened. The room felt less like a study space, and more like a trap tightening around her mind. The once familiar notes on her desk faded completely, replaced by blank sheets that seemed to absorb light. Her fingers trembled as she reached to steady herself against the cold wall. Suddenly, the door handle rattled violently, jerking as if someone outside was trying to get in. Aiko rushed to the door, twisting the knob frantically, but it wouldn't budge. "Let me out," she whispered, voice barely audible. Down the hallway, footsteps echoed. Slow, deliberate, but not quite human. Shadows flickered beneath the frosted glass panels, but when she called out, no one answered. Later, a janitor she spotted near the philosophy wing gave her a strange, wary glance. His eyes darkened when she mentioned room 3N. "That room," he said carefully, voice low, "has swallowed more than a few students over the years. Not all come back the same." Before she could ask more, he hurried away, leaving behind an unsettling silence that hung in the air like smoke. Back inside, the lights flickered again, plunging the room into darkness for a moment before flickering back on. The hum transformed into a chant, echoing from nowhere and everywhere at once. Aiko's heart hammered as she sank to the floor, clutching her head. Memories began slipping, first small details, then entire moments. Her own name felt distant, like a word someone else had told her long ago. Then the room seemed to change around her. Walls dissolved into shadows, and the ceiling stretched upward into an endless void. A voice, soft yet commanding, whispered from the darkness, "You don't belong here." Aiko wanted to run but found herself rooted to the spot, caught between fading memories and the creeping dread of losing herself completely. Outside, the world carried on, unaware of the silent battle unfolding behind the locked door of room 3N. Aiko's mind was slipping fast. The whispers had grown into a chorus, swirling around her, drowning out everything else. The air grew thick, heavy, as if the room itself was breathing, inhale, exhale, pulling her deeper into its silent grasp. Suddenly, the fluorescent lights dimmed until only a faint glow remained. The walls seemed to pulse, breathing with a life of their own. Aiko's heart pounded so loudly she feared it might burst through her chest. Then, from the shadows, a figure appeared. Not fully formed, more like a flicker of smoke given shape. It moved slowly toward her, translucent and shimmering. "You forget," it whispered, voice like wind over stone. "You forget, because it must be so." Aiko tried to speak, but her voice was gone. Her thoughts scattered like leaves in a storm. The figure reached out, fingertips brushing her forehead, and suddenly flashes flooded her mind, images of ancient monks chanting, rituals of Kikansho, the deliberate erasure of memory. She realized then, Room 3, N was built over a monastery where monks practiced a forbidden ritual designed to wipe the mind clean, to erase pain and suffering. But something had gone wrong. The figure's gaze pierced her soul. "You are not who you think you are." Aiko's world blurred. Time fractured, seconds stretching into eternity and collapsing again. Desperate, she glanced at the door, hoping for escape. But the hallway outside was gone, replaced by endless darkness. Then the lights flickered back to full brightness. The room solidified, and Aiko was alone again. But everything had changed. She couldn't remember how she had gotten here. She couldn't remember who she was. And she knew with bone-deep certainty that the room wasn't finished with her yet. Days after her terrifying experience, Aiko found herself sitting across from a professor known for his skepticism. Dr. Tanaka had spent years studying the university's history, and he reluctantly shared the truth behind Room 3N. The room wasn't just another classroom. It was built over the ruins of a monastery where monks practiced Kikansho, a ritual designed to erase painful memories and suffering by wiping the mind clean. This ancient practice was thought to bring peace, but something had twisted over the centuries. The university had no records of the monastery, as if it had been erased from history itself. The ritual's residue lingered, embedded into the very walls of Room 3N, affecting anyone who spent too much time inside. Dr. Tanaka admitted that several students had vanished or returned changed, like Aiko. Some lost hours, others lost weeks, and a few never returned at all. The room's power seemed strongest during exam season, when minds were already stretched thin, vulnerable to slipping into forgetfulness. Aiko realized that the whispers, the pulsing walls, and the shadows weren't random hauntings. They were echoes of a ritual meant to erase suffering, but trapped souls instead. The professor warned her to stay away, but Aiko couldn't shake the feeling that the room was trying to tell her something buried deep in forgotten memories. She wondered, was the ritual protecting the students or trapping them? And if the monks' intention was to erase pain, what had caused the ritual to become a curse? With every unanswered question, Aiko felt the room's silent pull growing stronger. The truth was there. somewhere between memory and oblivion, but finding it might cost her everything. Aiko left the university that day feeling unmoored, the weight of forgotten memories pressing down on her like a storm cloud. She never returned to room 3N, but sometimes, late at night, she hears the hum, the same low pulsing sound that filled the room. And when the wind carries whispers through the ancient halls, she wonders if the ritual's curse is far from over. Students still vanish. Names fade. And room 3N waits silently, ready to claim the next lost soul. Who or what decides who forgets, and how many more will be swallowed by the silence? Some stories don't end, they just fade away. I hope you enjoyed these stories. If you like them and want to listen to more, feel free to subscribe and put on your notifications. I upload at least 3 times a week. Wish you all the best.